Hello, everybody, and welcome. I am Krysta Gibson, and my colleague is Todd Weeb. Hi, Todd.
Hello, hi, Krysta. Great to see you.
Same here. And we're calling this a chat with Krysta and Todd. And the reason why is nobody's going to interview anybody else. But just briefly, I want to say that we met one another. We've never met in person. Todd is in Vancouver, Canada. I am in Phoenix, Arizona. And we met each other through Substack, who offered these opportunities for those of us who have newsletters to get together on Fridays. It lasted 6 weeks, I think.
Something like that, yeah. It was great.
And yeah, when we were in this group together, and it was to help each other as writers, as you know, our newsletters. Well, Todd and I have kept up a conversation, sometimes through Zoom, sometimes through email. And so we thought, wow, this is really interesting for people to know kind of who we are, because we come from such different backgrounds. We're kind of like an oddity that we would have formed the friendship that we are forming. Yeah. So the way I think we'll start, just instead of me saying any more, is Todd, why don't you talk a bit about your background, who you are, then I'll do the same thing, and then we'll go from there.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much. Great to join you. And I know you lived in this part of the world for quite some time.
Right, in Washington State.
Yeah, and I had relatives and friends live down in Phoenix and Tucson. And so I know a little bit about where you are. And so it's interesting to, so my background, well, yeah, Substack kind of occasioned this friendship, right? And that was, there were, I don't know, 5 or 6 other people.
5 or 6, yeah.
Really, really interesting people writing about various things. But the cohort that we were in this experiment, like learning to write and talking to one another, and they did put us together. So you know, people who might be interested in. So, you know, my background is, in terms of what I'm writing, is I guess the word people would use is religious. So I come from a context in which my work for more than 25 years was like church work, pastor. So, and particularly a pastor within what people would label kind of the evangelical part of Christian faith. That's, even as I say that, right, I feel like, oh no, hope people don't get the wrong idea, especially like in and around Phoenix. I've been there. I've seen what evangelicalism is in Phoenix. That's not really as much the Canadian expression, though some of it is leaning that way. And then in my particular experience, of course, there's some differences there as well. But it's still part of a faith tradition that was quite really conservative. My background in terms of my work, that was not my upbringing. My grandparents were Mennonite. That's last name Weeb comes from, and then my upbringing was kind of in and around Baptist churches. But then my work was a church that it's a smaller group. They don't call themselves a denomination, called the Plymouth Brethren. The Plymouth Brethren are responsible for things like the concept of the rapture, for people who might be interested in that. I don't believe in the rapture. It's something that came up just over 200 years ago, this idea that people would disappear. But the Plymouth Brethren were a breakaway sect of the Anglican Church in England, and then they formed assemblies that would, what they called their churches in various parts of the world. And the churches were all self-governed. They weren't formally connected. But many Plymouth Brethren churches became kind of community evangelical churches, the ones that were more open. And that's a, you know, open is not quite what they were. But anyway, so my background, I did a university degree, not in religious studies or anything like that, not seminary at that point, and was working in other fields, and then got hired in youth work, working with high school students, college students, and that was 10 years. And I worked at a Presbyterian church for a couple of years. And then I came back to the church that I was at in the senior ministry role, like lead pastor, senior pastor, whatever you'd say, and did that for 15 years. Loved it, loved the people, but I already in a way didn't fit. I certainly wasn't as conservative as most of the people. I used to say from the pulpit, I preached most Sundays, probably 75% of the time. And I used to say to people, like, I hope there are people in this congregation who vote, in our case. So in your case, you would say, I hope there are people who vote Republican and Democrat out of their Christian conviction, and Green and whatever. So up here it was, you know, I hope people vote liberal and conservative and green and NDP, because there are Christian reasons to, and what, of course, we see happening in your country and various places is an alignment of evangelicalism with a political party or expression. So that was not my, I wasn't that, but I love the people accepted and cared for me and my family, and I enjoyed the time there. It all kind of came apart a few years ago, pretty suddenly with some conflict. Even though the board I liked, they were all people that I liked and stuff, but in terms of direction and where we were going. And so on one Sunday, it's just over 3 years ago now, end of July, 3 years ago, the whole staff, myself, and it wasn't a big church, but the whole staff left, and like a management level, so some would say deacons or whatever, and so left on the same Sunday. We tried to work it out with the board and couldn't. We had a mediator who worked with Nelson Mandela in South Africa years ago.
Oh.
He was wonderful, met with all of us, and then said to me, Todd, there's no hope. So in terms of coming together on this. So I still know and am connected with most of those people, even the ones that the disagreement was with. But after that, I decided I didn't want to go back into proper, being a full-time pastor. So I started with a number of others, this nonprofit organization that is still registered basically as a church. We have some meetings we do, but really the whole purpose of the thing is to articulate a more hopeful theology, one that is not divisive, one that is not hateful, one that is not fearful, one that's not, I would call, kind of dark in terms of its view of the future. And I believe, and doesn't, that it's also happens to be Christian in terms of what, so my belief is there's been a distortion in how many of these things have been expressed. And so we're doing that work, and we love it. And part of that work is the Substack newsletter that goes out twice a week from us. And that's how we met. So that's my background a little bit. We can get more into, I know just bits and pieces of yours, just the tags, right? Like you use conservative, Catholic, but fill that in, because I'd like to hear.
Yeah, I was raised in South Texas, in San Antonio, and by a very conservative Catholic family, and I was very religious as a child. I would, even in the summertime, walk to church by myself. I was totally, and I wanted more than anything to be a nun. I wanted to be a Catholic nun so bad. And so I did. I went into a convent when I was just 15. It was hard to find one who would take me that young, but I did. It was a small Irish order. And I knew the nuns because they taught at the school, one of the schools I went to. So I went into the convent at 15, and I just felt I had come home. I was so happy. The first couple of years, you pray a lot and meditate, and you're basically on retreat. And I was in seventh heaven. The nuns wanted me to study, to be a music teacher, because I have a music background. So I went, started college and so on. I took my vows twice, poverty, chastity, and obedience. After the second time, shortly thereafter, I started realizing how miserable I was. And no matter how good I was, how I followed the rules, all of those things. And it was like, I guess in some Christian churches, they would call it the Holy Spirit spoke, my intuition, my inner self, my higher self, whatever was saying, okay, you're done here. It's like I was put in an incubator, and it was like, okay, you're cooked, time to get out. And so I had to write to the bishop to get permission. And my mother, the nun who ran the place, Mother Superior, there we go. She agreed with me. She said, you've been a perfect nun, you've done nothing wrong, but clearly this is not, you need to move on. So I wrote for permission. Well, here's what happened, where I broke from what I call it. There's Christianity with a capital C, and there's Christianity with a small c. I broke from Christianity, what I saw as the small c. What happened was, once word got out that I was leaving, the nuns, there were 26 of us, we had lived as sisters for 5 years. They treated me like dirt. I would meet them on the walkway, like we had 2 buildings, and they would get off the walkway, put their heads down, and wouldn't even look at me. I had to wait like 2 weeks. I had to live like that for 2 weeks. And that threw me a whole new tizzy. It was like, wait, this isn't the way I was raised. This isn't what Jesus taught. This isn't Christianity with a big C. This is Christianity with a small c, although I couldn't have verbalized that at the time. When I got out of there, it was like my entire world had crashed. Everything I believed in. Well, right at that time, this priest who had baptized me and who I had known my entire life, he died. So I went to the church and his body was laid out. I was in the church by myself with his body.
How
And I
old were you
looked at
then?
him. One,
How old were you then?
I just was gonna turn 21.
Wow. Okay.
In there, yeah. So I went in at 15 and left, and was just turning 21. And I looked at him and I just, because I had been through this turmoil, and I looked at him and I said, I said, I have been a Catholic my whole life. I have loved Jesus. I have done all of these things, but I want you to know I am done. I am done with religion. I am done with Jesus. I am done with the Bible. I am done, because that is not what I believe. That is not how I was raised. So that began a 13-year period where I was not involved in, talk about, you go from a convent to the world. Right. And I went through a real wild period, because here I was at 21. I had never lived my adolescence. So I was 21 years old, living my adolescence at night, out partying and drinking and having a good old time.
Yeah.
And during the day, I had several different things I did. I was a music teacher. I was a drug counselor, on and on. And so I lived that way for 13 years. I decided, because I needed a God, I decided that God was a creature on another planet who was benevolent and loving and cared for me and cared for the planet, and that the law that I would live by would be the law of loving and being kind and treating other people the way I wanted to treat them, and so on and so forth. So I lived that way until the early 1980s, when I just turned in my 30s, and a friend introduced me. I'm not going to go into the whole story, it's too long, but she introduced me to New Thought, New Age,
Yes.
metaphysics. There's all different words for it. And the minute I started looking at some of those teachings, those books, I was at home. So this is it. This is what I believe. This is the way to live my life, where I care for other people. I care for myself. I learned about manifesting and all these great things. And from that, I started a New Age newspaper that I had for 11 years and sold it. And so I've been an author, a mentor, a teacher, all kinds of things in that milieu of what you'd call spiritual, but not religious.
Yeah, yeah.
Most of the people who follow me, whether on Substack or my books or whatever, my classes, identify that way as well. And many of them have been deeply damaged by small Christianity. Wow. But they don't, they are spiritual. We are spiritual. And for me, the teachings of Jesus are all about love one another the way I have loved you. That's it.
This is my commandment, that you love one another.
Exactly. And that, to me, that's it. And I was on TV once, in my early days when I was doing all this New Age stuff. I became pretty well known as one of the spokespeople, and a local news station asked me to be on TV and debate a Christian minister. And I said, I'm not going to debate anybody, but I'm happy to come on and we can just talk about our beliefs. So he started first, and there was the news anchor was between us. Yeah. He started first, and he was all about how this is the work of Satan and this is terrible and awful.
Was he really?
Yes, yes. And I just sat there, and when he was done, the news anchor turned to me and I said, I have no idea what he's talking about. I said, to me, Christianity comes down to what Jesus said in the New Testament, which is love one another as I have loved you. And I said, that's what the conscious community, the New Age community, whatever you want to call us, that's what we're about. We are about love. And I said, I honestly do not understand why he has a problem with that. There was a moment of silence, and they didn't know where to go with it, because that's all I was going to say. And
well, because he's ready for a fight and you're not fighting.
Right. Love doesn't fight. Well, unless you have to, but
yeah, well, there's the New Age movement, in my conservative background, the evangelical background, there was a time there's different opponents set up all the time, right? In
Yes.
whether it's evangelical Christianity or other expressions, anything that is trying to gain power or money or influence or whatever, can do so by setting up opponents. And there's no doubt that even the expression of evangelicalism that I was part of, New Age movement, I didn't do it, just
Right. Right. No, I
but
understand.
the New Age movement, New Age was attacked, mocked, used from the pulpit very often. In many places I would hear about the dangers of New Age, right?
Right.
Wishy-washy or this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
Certainly I didn't pick up, I'm sure there was some, but I didn't encounter this, a real fulsome ability to, or desire to, like, understand and talk and listen. And it was
Right.
just set up. So you would have been the kind of person that those kinds of ministers would have been warning people about.
Right.
And
Exactly.
that man would have come to that debate
Exactly. Ready to
from
fight.
that culture that I just, and he's gonna take you down, kind of. In your experience, what was it that people like that were afraid of with people like you or with New Age?
You know what it is that people who are quote unquote New Age or spiritual, not religious, tend to be very open.
Yeah.
And what you have is, of course, you have, like, I work with crystals. We do weird stuff. There's astrologers, there's yoga, there's oh, God forbid, meditation. I remember when meditation was a bad word. Even
though meditation is part of Christian expression for
of course, yes.
thousands of years. Yeah.
And as a nun, we meditated every day, several times a day.
Yes, exactly.
7 days meditation retreats, for God's sake, but it's like they lump together all the weird, what they perceive as weird, as bad and evil and against the Bible. Well, what I say is that people who tend to, now, yes, there are some wackos, and I'll even use the word, there's some wackadoodle people, but there is everywhere.
Sure.
But as a rule, what it is people, we're open. It's like, okay, tell me about it. How does that work? I've never studied that. I don't know anything about it. And that scares them. Because, like, I was raised, here's your box. This is Catholicism. We are the best. Everybody else is going to hell. Even my little girlfriend that lived across the street, who was Protestant, we were taught she's going to hell.
And she's probably taught that you are.
Right. And it's like, that's so defensive. And so what they don't like is we took these boxes, whether it's Mormonism, Baptist, whatever, we took these boxes and said, no, breaking out of my box. Yeah. And I'm going to look around and see and have an open mind, an open heart. And it's, yes, sometimes you throw the baby out with the bathwater, like I did for a while, but then I got the baby back and I said, okay, baby's not so bad, but I'm not going back into a box of any kind, not even the New Age box.
Right.
I'm not in that box either. They want to put me in it, but I won't go there. And so that's what they fear. They fear people. My experience from talking to them is they fear the openness. Like I have family members, oh, she's going to go to hell. I'm just so afraid for her soul because she's not in the Catholic Church anymore, or the Episcopal Church, or whatever. And that to me is just foreign. It's a foreign language. God isn't like that. God is so much bigger than any one religion. And that's what I think they're afraid of, that we don't go into the boxes.
It's interesting it comes up because you mentioned it a few times. Power and control and all those things. But one of the kind of hurdles to cross or to get over, it's huge. So to even say that is, and you mentioned it a couple of times, is that concept of hell.
Yes. Yes.
And the fear that comes, and that was the base of the warnings against New Age, right? So
exactly.
I heard what you're saying. I heard it, at that time many years ago. The underlying thing was these people or this movement or whatever, it will lead you to. Now, most ministers, at least in my experience, didn't say that directly, but many would have. They would have said this.
Absolutely, they did. Yeah, they would say
your eternal damnation or something. What about like your personal experience with that then? Because when you were young, when you were a teenager, and in your adolescent years, you would have picked up on that concept, right? So at some point, you had to say goodbye to that concept. I would.
I did. You know, when I left the church, when I just said, I'm done with that, I threw it all out. And for me, it was okay, I'm starting from square one, and I am going to look at life, look at philosophies, look at beliefs in a new light. I mean, it was really quite a gift that the nuns gave me by being so mean and mean spirited. They
That's
gave
good.
me a wonderful gift because I was able, I mean, I was so hurt, so damaged by that, that I was able to just thrust that all aside and say, okay, I'm at square one. Obviously, that whole thing is a lie. So I was able to just talk about a box. I put them all in a box and said, okay, you're over there. Now I'm going to look at all of this because I was raised with that. I'm going to look at everything else and see what's there. And so I was open to, okay, what is hell? What is heaven? What's we had purgatory.
Yeah, that was pretty big. And
Yeah, we got all the different levels.
yeah.
And so I was able to do a lot of reading, talking to people. And for me, the biggest key, I think, for all of us, this is my belief, is meditation. Because when you go into that, whether you want to call it prayer, contemplative prayer, meditation, whatever your words are, when you regularly, preferably daily, go to that space and where you connect with that spiritual part of yourself and of the universe, God, angels, whatever, you see and intuit and feel the truth. And how you then package that is a whole different matter.
You
But
just
that's across all disciplines.
Yeah, and it just, I think this is one of the reasons we connect. You know, we say things where we're coming from, our perspective, the interests we have, and but then we're able to hear in the other, like, oh, that's like Krysta's version of this thing that I feel, and so
Right.
when you say that, you into it, or like, there's a lack of kind of fear and haste. One of the sayings we use in our nonprofit a lot that's trying to help people find more hopeful, and this is, we would say Christian and non-Christian, or people who identify as Christian and people who don't, that the desire for hope, right, that and bringing people together. And
Right.
one of the things we say from the Christian perspective often is a quote of a guy that's informed a lot of our perspective, Karl Barth, a theologian writing in the early 20th century, who was a dissenter against the Nazis and was kicked out. But basically the Christian church, the evangelical church, didn't go Barth's way, which was more hopeful, more, he said things like the division between believer and unbeliever is something that's entirely unhelpful, even in Christian theology. If you're gonna identify anybody as an unbeliever, make sure it's yourself. He said there's distinction between Christian and non-Christian. We don't want to make say that, like, we want to allow people to have their identities and such. But anyway, one of the things Barth said, so this is what resonates with the intuit thing to me, is Barth said that, now he's using the word not in the current political thing, he's writing many years ago, but he said evangelical, which means good news, right? It used to, at least. Truly evangelical theology, something that is good, is modest. He said, because it doesn't have to shout or yell, because it will prove itself to be true. When you say, and that's, I picked this up in your writing, even the way you put ideas out, you put an idea out, but I can tell you trust that idea is true. So you're not forcing your reader, like, here's reader the thing you need to think.
Right.
You trust it enough that you identify where you've seen it to be true. And then I can tell, I think we share this, that you then really have the confidence that those who engage, listen, pay attention, whatever, will also find that to be true. And I think there's something so hopeful in that. There's no competition in it, anything like that, but it is a trust, just a different feel and energy than much of the talk around spirituality or particularly religion right now, right?
Oh my gosh. And the other thing is allowing people to disagree. Now, what's interesting to me is most people who do take issue with something I write don't put it in the comments section at Substack. They'll send me a private email, which is fine.
Most of my engagement is email too.
But there are people who disagree, and they'll say, I read what you wrote, I don't agree because of this or whatever. And I've encouraged some of them to go back to Substack and put that in the comments, because
Oh, good for you.
it's good for people to read disagreement because it's not a hostile disagreement.
Yeah.
And I also trust people, if what I write isn't true for them, that's okay. Guess what? They don't have to believe the way I believe. They don't have to have my experiences. And so you're right. And that's what I appreciate about your writing is I feel like, I think we're kind of fans of each other because
Yeah.
you also put out what you believe or how you see things. And I like how you will frequently kind of show how that does differ from
Yeah.
the
Okay.
former position you may have had, and some people who read you might still hold.
Yeah.
And then so there's this sense, which is what I think is where you're coming from with hopeful. There's this sense of acceptance of one another.
Yeah.
We don't have to be alike. We can have some different views and still respect one another.
Yeah. It feels, does it feel countercultural to you? That approach you're describing? I mean, I see a fair bit of it.
In a way, I don't think, I think a lot of people still need boxes.
Mm.
And we're kind of saying, hey, here's a box that I don't agree with that box anymore. Hey, look over here. And I think that, and I really want to get into this. That's why I think there's this tendency toward authoritarianism. As I think as a people, as a race, and I mean the human race, as the planetary race, as a general rule, we've started to be somewhat more liberal and open and accepting. And that scared these other people to death because they can't do that.
There's a backlash for sure.
Yep, they can't do it. They need a box. So they want somebody to tell them how to think, tell them how to behave, tell me how I'm good, and then it's comfortable.
You and I share that for sure, that sense of recognizing that, and with a compassion to, so this is kind of the, to use the word, because I do see this tone in how you write and how you speak and how you engage even in conversation, a pastoral tone, like a caring heart kind of tone, to including to people who seem to, as you say, need those boxes. That those people are not enemy.
Right.
And even some of the culture that I came from, that was, that was I was part of. And again, I would say I was always kind of like, Todd doesn't quite, fit the program, but that was, I was still accepted and still, you know what I mean? I was never that hardcore conservative by any means. But I know, like, I can think of people who I love who just seem to need those lines,
Right.
or they so respect leadership, the person who's up in my case in the pulpit or whatever, that you better darn well believe what they say to some degree, right? So, then I don't know, like the question would be then, does work like ours make a difference in the current cultural context? I think we would both say yes. Otherwise, I would imagine we wouldn't be doing it.
I think, but I think what we need are for people to hear us, they need to come close to being out of that box.
Yeah.
It's kind of like at some point, their higher self, their inner self, their God's, whatever, has started telling them, giving them little hints, little clues. Hey, there's more, there's another way to look at things, so they're just over here and they're kind of ready. And then they run into people like us, whether through our writing or our talking or whatever, and they go, oh, wait, listen to them. Maybe they have something for me. And then they start listening and reading and they go, wow, that rings some truth for me. And it is for me, it's not people have to give up Christianity with a big C. Yeah. I have dear friends who call themselves Christian. I don't, even though I believe in Jesus and many of the teachings. I just don't want that label.
You're not alone. There's many people that I know that
but I know people who have that label. They go to a what I would call a regular brand church, although they tend to go to the more
like progressive or
But they would agree with me totally. That's their home though. And I have no difficulty with that. Some people want a church home and the sense of community and all that comes. And I have belonged to different churches over the years, more progressive churches. So it isn't about giving up your church. It isn't about giving up teachings or your brand or whatever, but it is about that becoming open.
Well, it's interesting how, like, just within Christian faith itself, that people like us, and although we're not, our group isn't like angry at the more conservative people. We, as you say, I will write in the newsletters, this is where this kind of thinking comes from. This is where I think it's faulty.
Right.
That, some of these divisive lines or whatever.
Right.
I was part of a tradition that for years subscribed to these lines. That, like, for example, on the aboltion issue or something, right?
Right.
I'd point out, okay, abortion was not a big issue in the evangelical church, even following Roe versus Wade.
Right.
And it became something that was politicized and formed a voting bloc and the rest. And you point out, both of us have pointed out, where there's just an absence in scripture on certain issues and such, right? So I'll point that out. But there's something with, like you say, the people who are getting close to that or are open to. So even within Christianity, what I would say here is, Jesus was clearly, if you read the Gospels, a line breaker and a barrier breaker in terms of gender and politics and religious groupings, and always breaking those lines. So how he became kind of held hostage by people who want to make sure that those lines are never broken.
Right, because they aren't from him.
Right. And so that's another common thing in our work is I am more so within the Christian tradition, but that's not, there's lots of people outside the tradition who are interested in what we're doing, trying to say, wait a minute, this was never about keeping the status quo, right? It was, that's very interesting that kind of work.
Well, and I think what's real interesting, and I'd be curious if this is happening as much in Canada as it is in the US, what I find really interesting right now is the focus that the Republicans in this country are putting on gay people, transgender people, people who are outside the box as far as their sexual identity goes. It has become like this hugely politicized thing, and I'm gay, I've said that in my column before. And so, of course, that hits home for me.
Oh, you're gay and you're new age? You're like you're the person, right? Yeah.
Oh, I'm everything they hate.
Yeah.
Except my skin is white. So that's the good thing. My skin is white. If it was brown or black, I'd be in really bad trouble.
You must have had times where you get to know somebody, they most of the time those questions don't come up.
Right.
Religion or sexuality or whatever. And knowing who you are, your space in life, I would have, I don't know, like, we haven't met in person, so even like how you present, like in terms of dress or whatever that, but I would assume that many people get to know you and then find out, and oh no, what do we do with her?
Exactly.
Okay.
That has happened, especially, I have held some management positions, like I was the director of a assisted living retirement dementia community, had 250 residents I was responsible for, a staff of 50. I've been the head of a senior center where 99% of the people were very conservative. And, I'm just me. And I don't run around with a sign saying I believe this or that. I just live my life, live my truth. And then occasionally it'll come out that I'm either, don't go to a regular church, or that I'm gay or whatever. And yes, people go through this initial shock and they have a real hard time coming to terms. How can this person who we dearly love and respect and is so good to us, how can she be this horrible thing?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, because clearly they don't see you as horrible, but again,
no. So they have to go, they have to put that together in their minds. How can
I find it curious that, I understand a little bit the abortion issue more from though I think you could, a person could hope that there are fewer abortions, but be very much pro-choice. That's
absolutely,
a legitimate.
Absolutely.
That
the goal is that they wouldn't be needed.
I think of the idea of somebody else's belief system being imposed upon my choices.
Yes.
And I would go back to many of my evangelical friends and I would say to them, are you okay with another religious system, belief system,
right,
being imposed upon you for how you, if you're against that in principle, then you should be against your own religious belief system,
Right.
being imposed on others' actions. So the abortion thing, I understand a little bit, like on the political thing. For me, I do sometimes wonder why the issue, it's not an issue, but why this issue so-called of homosexuality or sexuality has become one that is such I would say an idol within religious systems, particularly not only Christian, right? But in my experience, for sure. I never did once. I clearly am, open on those things. Some people would really struggle with that. In my, if I was part of a church that never would have done a like a wedding for two people who were gay or something.
Right. Oh yeah.
So while I held a particular view, if I'm sanctioned by a group, right, that I'm not going to use that to push or force. But if somebody had to come to me at that point and asked, I probably would have been willing to bring that issue up in conversation and say my stance. But so you ask, in Canada, is that still? It is actually. It's not as, the vitriol is not as present as it is down where you are, I don't think. But definitely the evangelical church in Canada has had a clear stance on this issue. The Bible says, even though there's only 6 verses, there, interpretation of those verses, the original language, all the rest is kind of, but it clearly is one of these dividing line issues that now for most, like my wife and I and some friends just went to the big Pride parade here.
You wrote about that. It was a great article.
It was fantastic, right? And there would still be people, my friends included, even some of the ones who they would kind of go, oh, is that a step too far or something, right? And so, I mean, I try to be, like you say, with the people who need the boxes. I try to obviously be loving and caring, but yeah, I don't need any more to kind of put walls around my own beliefs and convictions.
Exactly. Right.
To when you're running something that is more our own, and I think that's one of the reasons that I've resisted becoming like full-time at a regular church, even a progressive church, right? Because sometimes then you're forced into certain,
exactly.
It's got to be this way, right? Like so I think it's definitely still used by politicians and others.
Oh yes, a divisive issue that they can get people on their side.
But it would never be on the ballot again here, like it potentially could be there. Even in conservative churches, they might say something like from the pulpit or whatever, they might. But most of the people sitting in the congregation would probably believe this is a right that other people should have, even if I don't. Right.
Even if you don't agree with it,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not heterosexual, but I'm not going to say you can't be. Why would I do that?
I said that to a woman who was.
You marry a woman? How dare you?
Yeah, I said that to a woman who was on our board. It wasn't that long before things kind of came apart, but she's a lovely person, and she's one of these. She does so much for everybody else, all these other kinds of things. But she could tell in how I spoke, and even I had a sermon a number of years ago that was like. I jokingly afterwards called it my coming out sermon, but it was because I basically said, what you guys have heard about homosexuality and whatever, like the Bible says this, it's actually not that clear. Even in our own congregation, there's been damage done in families, loving families.
Tell me about it.
Loving families, because this family thinks the minister is telling them to act such and such. Not me, I'm like other, and then, their relationship with their child or whatever is right. Anyway, she came to me, she could tell that I was obviously more open than most of the people who were voices she was hearing elsewhere. So she asked me about it, and I said to her, well, it's all worked out for you though, right? And she's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, you've been married for 40 some years and you're allowed to have sex and you're allowed, but I guess you get to tell these other people that they can't. Like, is that okay? Like,
Good
what if
you?
And to her credit, she did kind of go, huh. I mean, I don't think she changed it or anything like that, but it's so small, right?
Right.
What about now? Like, how about, I don't know, I look at what's happening in your country and I see it as so regressive.
I know, it's awful. I mean, we've just it's a pendulum swing, and I say a lot of it, they said a lot of this started back with Newt Gingrich 50 years ago.
Yes.
And I believe that. However, I believe what really stirred it up was when Obama got elected. How dare we put a Black man in the White House as the president of this country? And I honestly believe that was a point, that was a bridge too far. And I think the liberal beliefs and all of that got all put into that. And I honestly believe that was when a lot of these people started twisting and turning. And it's like, wait, this country has gone too far. You know, we've got to bring it back. And I think that would allow them to really get in there and turn a lot of people on many issues. But that's just my belief. I don't know that that's
Well,
true.
I mean, sure, I accept that it's just your belief, like, well, in terms of but you also, if you look at the evidence of what's happening, like Viktor Orban, the president of Hungary, speaking at the conservatives' main thing, saying like mixed race is a problem and all of the stuff that this is the kind of stuff I would assume we're past, but it's largely, so from my concern, it's largely the evangelical community in your country that is propping up people like this.
I know.
And thinking that they're fighting their battles. I would say the thing that I was suspicious of in all the years I was minister, of the more conservative expression of Christian faith, evangelical Christian faith, the thing that I was suspicious of, and not to just say, oh, I was right, I don't feel like that, but I always had this hunch that evangelicalism was pretty thin. And that seemed to be more focused on opponents than on faith. Like the evangelicals all knew who the opponents were.
Right.
That was what kind of gave the movement its energy, right? Like we're going to stand up for whether it's family values, which also became bullshit. Like, give a crap about family values, obviously. If you know, it's who you are cheering for. And so when Trump came along, I really thought, okay, we'll see how thin evangelicalism is, because people will go like, well, he's so obviously has all these issues and whatever. The movement will kind of do some correction, but it hasn't gone that way. It's become more severe, more authoritarian.
Yep, exactly.
Undemocratic now.
Exactly. And how they can accept, you know, how the evangelical movement that we're talking about can accept this man as their quote unquote leader, because God sent him, and he has been, his whole lifestyle, you know, is immoral. You know, you look at all the different lawsuits and everything else. I mean, that they can turn a blind eye to all of that is amazing. And it just shows me how far down the tube any of us can go if we don't keep our brain engaged, you know?
Yeah.
So I mean, anybody can
how do you think your writing relates to that? Like what I mean is your writing in that context, in that cultural, political context. Some of those people, you'll meet friends and others, they might have come from that. Your writing is of a totally different spirit than that kind of approach.
Right.
You know, how do you kind of see your writing in that larger context? It's just like, I can't believe some of these difficult things are happening.
I think my writing fits in because there's a lot of people who see things, either they already see it the way I do, which is, oh my gosh, what the heck's going on with these people? Or they're close to that and they're looking for somebody to verbalize some of what they're feeling, some of what they're thinking. I know when I first got involved in metaphysics, that was what happened for me. It was like I was reading these books and I was going, oh my God, I've believed this for years. Oh my God, this is, you know, and I was simpatico, and so I wanted more. And I think that's part of what happens for people with my writing, if they're on the edge, especially. They're going, oh my gosh, yes, this makes so much more sense. And a lot of times I don't talk about any of this directly. I will occasionally. Mostly I'm just talking about ways to live our lives that we can be happier, more, you know, more part of society, live from a higher viewpoint. Because I also see what's going on right now. You know, in my world, we call it the 3D world and the 5D world. The 3D world is that world that still believes everything has to be hard. We all have to fight. I have to hate you, you have to hate me. That's the 3D world. And most of us either have left it or want to leave it. And we're living more the 5D world, which is acceptance of one another, being kind, being loving, being honest, trying to work for the common good. That's the 5D viewpoint. Well, you get those two viewpoints trying to live together, and it's really tough. Because this viewpoint doesn't want to accept this, and this viewpoint goes, oh my God, I can't live with that. And so it's trying to get these two viewpoints to come together somewhere
Yeah.
where we can, but something's got to give. I mean, in this country, something's got to give, and I think it's going to happen soon.
Yeah.
I just hope it breaks the way I'm hoping it will, and not the other, or we're in.
Well, it's possible that there could be some dark years ahead, right? Like
Exactly, that's what
both
I'm
of us are
afraid
old
of.
enough to know historically how you can take things for granted that, but I don't know, it was online somewhere. I saw images of Kabul, Afghanistan in the 1970s. And people were just in Western dress. It looked like the kind of cool 1970s clothes. They were,
Yeah.
and of course, the whole point was, look what's happened. This kind of fundamentalist religious thinking happens to be a different faith, but the matter to me has never been actually the particular faith expression. It's that fundamentalism in any movement that says the other person is the thing to be feared. We
Right.
must do away with the other. And you talk about that. You write about that. You write about something like fear. Fear is such a, I just saw so much fear in the evangelical church, right? Just riddled with, but fear is everywhere right now.
Right.
Marilyn Robinson, a Christian writer who writes a lot, she's a great novelist and whatever else. She has a great little essay called Fear in one of her books. And she basically argues that America is completely like just soaked in fear. And then she says, fear, and she's Christian, right? Fear is not a Christian habit of mind. Like something's happened to here but you actually had a post that like, and you'll have some of this in some of your posts. Here's like 4 or 5 suggestions of what to do with fear. And you mentioned as well that it's not always a bad thing, right? That
right.
So I do. And then another one of your things that I love was one on blessing. Like, so again, I'm kind of talking about how the world that I spent a lot of my life in, and that you start to see some of the common beautiful things.
Yes.
Blessing is something that the Christian church could teach. Mm-hmm. What would it mean to bless someone else who thinks differently than you?
Right.
Who, and you write about that kind of thing. And so that's, I think, where.
Yeah. And why can't we do that? And why do we have to, curse that person and try to get rid of them or control them or take away their rights or whatever, instead of just blessing them? I mean, that's what God does, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not behaving like God at all. I
think the assumption was for so long, I think it's still present in many people, right? But thankfully, I think we're seeing some of it break down. That somebody like you talked about sexuality, New Age, where like that you can't help me with my Christian faith, kind of was that like your danger.
Right.
And I think once you let the lines go, you realize, oh, we actually can help each other.
Right.
In the things we believe and that matter to us.
Right.
That person is not a threat to me. They're actually more than company.
Right.
They help.
Right.
And they help me get to the better things about what I believe and and I think that, but you've got to drop a lot of fear for that to happen, right?
Right. And I think, like that's one of the things I love about reading your writing, because that's why we're fans of each other, is, you who still identify as Christian with big C, can speak about these issues in such an open, loving, respectful, kind way. And that's really healing for me. And I know for other people who have come from this background, because one of the things for me is because I did come from that box mentality that I bought into so 100% that I went so far as to be a nun for 5 years. I can respect and understand that box. I don't agree with it. And, I encourage people to get out of it.
Yes.
Think for yourself.
Yes.
And yes, take the teachings, take the Bible or whatever, but use your head, use your thinking. And so I can respect that. And I think people feel that. And if we can respect each other and allow each other to be, that's where we need to go. But I think to get there, the society is going to have to go through.
It's such a knee-jerk thing. Like even many of the people who follow, maybe not many, but some, I would assume, who follow what we're doing, what I'm writing, and the rest. A conversation like this, a person who identifies the value of New Age, different labels, as you said, in your life, that talking about crystals and talking about even some of the people, like it's so ingrained in us, this whatever it was in our upbringing, especially the fear elements.
Right.
That, so crystals would be one. And I know it because I know how you kind of right away, as soon as you said crystals, you
Right.
kind of, there's a little qualification there, because there's people who would go, oh, she's one of them.
She's a nutcase.
What's Todd doing talking to her? You know what I mean? And that's what I want to break down, is help break down, is that no, this doesn't make, like just what you said, that this can help in the things that we think. There was one group, I was part of a little group once. It was like an interfaith kind of some really brilliant guy from Oxford in the UK or something, or some other university in the UK. He was Jewish, but he'd been part of this little group that they got together, people of different faiths, and their whole, and they would go for dinner or whatever they had. And their whole thing was to speak about what beauty and value they see in the other person's.
Right. Yes.
Right. And it just, of course, and all of them apparently came away saying, it actually didn't threaten my tradition at all. It actually helped me value my tradition more.
Exactly.
By having to speak about what's beautiful, what I see is beautiful in their tradition, right? That, so yeah, and then you come across these voices. I just like plugging books or whatever, that I think I'm going to talk to you about this in another context. My wife and I listened to an audiobook of a book called The Last Days. It's by Ali Miller, Millar. She was in the Jehovah's Witness group or movement in Scotland, and very conservative, very rigid, very kind of the expression she was in, and broke out of that box and just writes about it. It's so beautifully written and so powerful, but it's all a story of getting out of these boxes that control people.
Exactly.
And so there's many people, just think of all the people, I know you do, who could benefit from the kinds of things that you and I are doing. And you just hope the reach grows and whatever else, right? And
that's what we're trying to do with Substack. I mean, to come back to where we met, is our belief that what we're doing through Substack, that it is our platform where we can teach and speak and share in a written format, or like this, in a video or audio, whatever, trying to be there for people who need and want hope, or people who want to reevaluate maybe some of their beliefs, and maybe they don't want to walk out of the box, but they want to open a window at least, and let in a little fresh air. And then, because you bring up crystals, I always laugh. Go read the Bible. There's the breastplate, which had crystals and rocks on it.
Thank you.
You go through the Bible and you go underline
how they chose disciples, rolls of dice. Yeah,
but all the ways they use crystals and stones. And then I want you to go through the New Testament, and I challenge people to do this. And I want you to yellow highlight in your copy of the New Testament exactly where Jesus talked in a bad way about homosexuality. It isn't there. He has nothing to say, and homosexuality was quite popular in his day and accepted. It was accepted for him. Yeah. And he didn't say anything. So don't be going back to the Old Testament. That's fine. But that's what he taught. Well, you show me where he said anything about it. And you can't. You can't. And then you get even in like the book of Acts. There's a guy, he's been on our podcast, and he's awesome. A guy named Willie James Jennings. He's a big time theologian in the United States. He's at Yale Divinity School right now. But I met him in Vancouver. He was teaching something out here, and then we connected. And he has a commentary on Acts that's fantastic. He's just this beautiful, brilliant kind of. But in his commentary on Acts, you talk about Jesus says nothing. Then the first like super powerful, of course, not the Saul Paul narrative is a bit different, but conversion narrative in the book of Acts is the Ethiopian eunuch, who clearly in that time there's sexual connotations there's whatever, and it's God, the Holy Spirit, who's basically instructing followers of the church, go find this person. Like that's the person, that, and so these lines that have come up since, like if you just even Christian scripture doesn't necessarily say the things people exactly. But we do know that Jesus said, as you pointed out, if you love me, you'll do what I command. Sounds like the old conservative language, right? But right. And this is my command: love one another. Yep.
as I've loved you. And so it's always compelling to me that so many people like yourself and others, there is such a clear delineation between frustration with the church or even separation from kind of the church, but a love for Jesus.
Mhm, mhm. He was a great, whether you would call him a teacher, a God, whatever, I just, again, don't put him in a box.
Right.
Don't put him in a box. He has so many wonderful things to teach. Well, go with the teachings and don't have to put your own belief system of right and wrong and everything on top of what he said.
Yeah.
Meditate on it. That's the other thing. I come back to meditation over and over, because if you take his teachings, even though we know they came down in a convoluted form,
That's right.
but some of it's very good, meditate on it and apply it to your world and your life, then go live it. That's what it's all about. Don't be just preaching to everybody else that they have to believe as you do,
No.
go live the teachings. And people, if you're living the teachings, whatever you're living, people are going to be interested.
Yeah, the call to love neighbor as yourself.
Right. And then we so don't see that today. I mean, that whether it's the evangelicals, whatever you want to say, but these Christians with a small c, there isn't love, there isn't respect, there isn't kindness there. And that's not what Jesus taught. This is their version of what he taught, and it is not what he taught at all.
Well, my take on it is that it's so far now and so extreme that actually evangelicalism, largely in the United States, has become Christian nationalism.
Yes, absolutely.
And for anybody listening, Christian nationalism is not Christian. There's nothing Christian about it other than it's a parasite on a religious tradition that is really valuable and worthy in history. Has its warts and everything else, but Christian nationalism, anytime it's expressed, and this is not the first time it's come up in history, it's actually not the only place it's happening. Putin's war is a Christian nationalist war. It just is the Russian Orthodox Church.
Right.
But he's arguing, make Russia great again. It's the same thing. It has nothing to do with Jesus Christ, and it's obviously not loving. It's about identifying and destroying enemies. It's about consolidating power. There was a while, it's a bit different, where the Nazi movement in Germany was a Christian nationalist movement for a while. Hitler was not like Trump in that, religion wasn't. But anyway, there were the German Christians, they called themselves. They followed lockstep behind Hitler, and it became, so anytime the faith gets aligned with political power, it's distortion, it's whatever. But what's troubling to me is it seems like, and I don't want, the majority of evangelical Christians in your country have bought into this.
Right. And that's so sad. Yeah.
It will have to be kind of burned out then.
Right. I know.
You'll have to have, from my interest, you'll have to have Christians who separate from that.
Yes.
It's happened in history before.
Yep.
Where,
Yep. And people with a big C Christian need to speak up, get out there, because if not, everybody's going to be believing this other is Christianity, and it's not.
No, and hopefully this is where I would also really align with you. If there are Christians who see that, they're deeply troubled by it. If the question is stay in a church like that, or go and step outside the label Christian, I would say it's more hopeful to go. Right.
I agree with you. I agree. Well, we're coming to the end of our time. We could go on all day.
Yeah.
I want to say one last thing. I lived in Canada, as you know. I told you I lived in Tsawwassen, outside Vancouver, for 5 years, worked there and so on. And I was a landed immigrant there. And then I moved from there to Point Roberts, and a border guard told me, US border guard told me I had to choose. I'd either have to be Canadian or be US. Well, he was wrong, but oh well, I didn't know any better. And I gave up my landed immigrant social insurance card. I want it back so bad. If something happens, can I get across the border? Will you guys take me back, please?
Oh yeah, well, if it's my decision, absolutely.
I wish I still had the card, but I don't.
You're not the only one. Apparently, this is something.
I know.
So you're not dual citizen now?
No.
Not landed immigrant status. You gave that up.
I gave it up. And if I had known he lied to me, I could have done both. And I wish I had known that I could have kept.
So you did that right at the border at that time?
Well, I just quit. I moved from Tawasin across to Point Roberts. So I was living in the States
Yeah.
again. And to keep my landed immigrant status, I would have had to have done some things
Oh,
like,
you just didn't do that.
yeah, but I didn't know enough at the time and I just
Yeah.
believed him. And I was so involved with other things at the time that I didn't have the mind I have now. But I've looked through my stuff and said, do I still have that card? Can I resurrect that somehow? I may need that, you know. So,
Well, as much as it's my decision, we'd welcome you back. And well, of course you can cross the border. We'd love
right,
to
of
come
course.
and visit where you used to live sometime.
I know. And I've been back once or twice. And it's
Or if I
just,
get down to Phoenix, we'll make sure to say
yeah,
hi
we'll
to you.
definitely have to.
As you know, people from Vancouver go to Phoenix constantly, right? So
Yeah.
like there's that's so many people from here spend the winters there.
Yeah, I know. So it'll be interesting. We're in summer right now. So
Well, we would anytime. So
well, thank you. Thank
I'll
you.
talk.
You
Yeah.
know, talk to the powers that be.
Yeah. Well, hey, and thank you for inviting me along this chat. And yeah, for anybody who reads our stuff, I would say go and listen to people like Krysta and others, including Krysta's stuff. You'll pick up some of the things that I'm talking about as well.
Yeah.
And if we can have more conversations like this with more people, right?
Wouldn't it be fun? Yeah, and I'm going to put, in fact, I'm putting how people can read each of our newsletters. I'll put that with this so people can, if they already follow you, they can find me and vice versa. So
thank you so much.
Great fun. Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll do it again.
Take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.